Okay, welcome here. This is Ray from explorerray.com and welcome for checking out my channel today. And today I want to talk about something that has to do with the time of the year we are heading into. This is spring, of course, and spring is maybe, in my opinion, the best time of the year for macro photography. And I just want to show you a very quick video showing you my setup and how I approach macro photography. Of course there are many different ways, but here we go. As you know, I use a lot of different type of camera, different type of equipment, but for macro it is DSLR and Canon, which are my weapon of choice. As you can see, this is my Premiere. This is how it looks. This is my Canon 5D Mark III, which I use here in this occasion. And this is the most interesting thing. This is the Canon Macro Twin Light MT24EX. It's called, fantastic name. But what's interesting with it, as the name implies, it's a twin thing, and you have the ability to have two separate flashes, and they can be adjusted around almost 360 degrees, and you can tilt them upwards and downwards and from and back. That is maybe the most important thing when it comes to macro, and that is that you're getting really close and you need a lot of light. The other thing, that is the 2/3 of the setup I use, and the last third is of course the lens itself. And I have only one macro lens. Many people use other ones. Because I try to take pictures of bugs and stuff, I would like a little bit of reach. I used before the Sigma 150mm macro, which was a fantastic lens. Now I use the Canon 180L. It's kind of pricey, but it's definitely worth it when it comes to sharpness. And let me say one thing at all. I don't know, for those of you who are new to macro, it might seem odd that it's an expensive lens when it only stops down to 3.5. This starts at 3.5. But what I get into in a very short while, the point is that when you do macro shots, you almost never need to have a lens that goes lower than f.8, even higher, maybe even f20, This lens stops down to f32. And the reason is very simple, and that is that the lower the depth of field, the higher the f-stop number, the more you can actually see, the more you have in focus. This is very easy to keep track of. And the way the macro lens performs is that you have a fixed distance from the sensor to the closest it can zoom. And the closest it can zoom is I don't know the English word, but like it's probably proximity limit or something like that. In Norwegian it's closeness border, directly translated. But the point is that when you are at the closest point it can zoom, then you have a 1-to-1 magnification, which is the magnificent thing about macro lenses. And what is nice about why I've chosen the 180mm, which is a quite long macro lens, is that I've never measured actually, but from the sensor, which is approximately here, and to the closest point which it can focus is 45 centimeters, so somewhere around here. And that macro lens gave me then the ability to have a little bit of working space when I'm trying to get like bumblebees, spiders, insects and so on, and trying to get a decent shot. Because that is the other thing. The problem is that, of course, if you're trying to just, let's say, take pictures of something, take a macro image of something that is still, like let's say a gem or some family heirloom or something like that, you can probably use a tripod to keep it still and get close, zoom in and take the shot. The problem is that when you're out in nature and you're trying to catch a flower, you have wind everywhere, you have creatures moving, you have something like that, you don't have that much time on you. So what you actually have to do, first of all, you have to get down really close, you have to lay down on the ground and try to really focus. That is the other trick I wanted to show you, and that is my primary setting that I use. What I use for a primary setting is three things which I learned from a very, very famous and very well-known macro photographer here in Norway. And first off, I set my camera to manual. That is the important thing. When you're shooting macro, of course, you have for many cameras, introductory DSLRs and so on, you have preset settings for macro and so on. That is fine, but I would recommend going for manual. And the first setting you choose is a setting which you can do handheld. And for me, when I'm outdoors, when I'm laying down and I make myself into kind of a sturdy tripod, because this setup here isn't, this of course is a very large setup, but of course it weighs approximately 2 kilos, 4 pounds, something like that. And keeping it handheld for a very long time isn't all that easy. But what I do is that the first setting in this I put on the manual is to find a shutter speed which I can do handheld. And 1/125th of a second, maybe 1/200th of a second, something like that, in that range, most people can do. That is the first step. The second step you do is that you put your ISO to 100 or as low as the ISO can go. If you have, for instance, I don't have macro equipment for my D810, my Nikon D810, but for my Nikon D810 I would probably use 64. I use the base ISO, sorry. That is step number 2. Step number 3 is to find an aperture which is sensible. And here's my point from what I said a little bit earlier. The aperture I choose is f8 or higher. Many people, when it comes to portrait or street photography or something, says f8 is your mate, like Australian, or f8 and stay there. That's a very, very nice aperture because you have most of your image in focus, and it kind of works. If you're shooting in daylight and you have flash and so on, all these things, or you have enough flashlight, you can probably shoot for a higher aperture, maybe even f14 or f16, and maybe even up to f20. Especially if you want to have the blackout effect. That means that what you are trying to focus on is dead sharp, but everything else straightly behind it is blacked out, you can use a very, very high or very low depth of field, like f20 or something like that, f16, f20, f32, and use a flash, and you will have a very, very narrow depth of field. So then you have three settings. First, you use manual. You find a shutter speed that you can do handheld, 125, 1200, something like that. You find an aperture. I would recommend starting you up at f8, and you lower your ISO to the lowest. The next setting is also, for many cameras that doesn't mean anything, but like on this camera which doesn't have a flash, when I put on a flash and I set my camera to do automatic or compulsory firing, I don't need to adjust my white balance, but if you do and you have the option, put the white balance on flash. So that's important. The last thing is how you meter the light. That is very, very important. How do you meter the light? The recommended setting is spot metering. And that is just to make sure that you have light on the subject you want to focus on. Because the problem is very often that, especially when you're trying to take pictures of bugs or things that are really, really small and you can't get as close as you want, you have to crop it. But if you have spot meter on the creature you want, you can make sure that the exposure is fairly correct when you shoot. So for me now I just have, I'm getting into it, but like for me now I have put up the settings here. I put up the settings here, and as you can see, now I'm at the border of the limiter, and I won't put out that image, but okay, this is how close you get. And the really cool thing is actually you can get very, very close. But then I had a little bit of distance to the subject, and of course, shooting insects you need that distance. When it comes to accessories, this is a very nice little trick. I have mentioned it in videos before, especially regarding my 70-200 lens. But this is extension tubes. I have 3 extension tubes in 2 different versions. This is a 12 millimeter extension tube, and this is a I think it's 25, yeah, a 25 millimeter extension tube, and this is another 12 millimeter. The point with an extension tube is that it's just a metallic ring which is hollow, which you can see straight through. But the point with the extension tube is the following. When you want to have the ratio of 1:1 on what you take a picture of and what is on your image sensor, you have to get really, really close. And as you can see, this is a 180 millimeter lens. This is far longer. This is actually almost as long as my 70-200, and the question is why. The question why it's so long is actually that you have the different elements, lens elements in the different groups are in front of the tube. So because it generates a little bit of distance. That's why you can also hear like portrait photographers using macro equipment, because you get the way it's developed makes it very easy to have a very shallow depth of field, so you can block out everything from behind. You can get a very nice bokeh. But what you do with the extension tubes is that you simply put them between. I can show you very quickly how you use it. You just put them between the lens and the camera itself. and you can stack them. That's why I have 3 of them. You just put it on the lens, and you put them on. You can put several, as many as you want, on top. What has happened here? I've generated more space between my lens and my subject. And what did I say? I said that for this particular lens I had 45 centimeters from the sensor, which resides approximately here somewhere in the camera, and to my closest point of what I want to shoot. When I put on a 12mm extension tube, that reduces the shortest distance it can focus. So that actually means that instead of, I don't know the maths exactly, but that means that instead of it's 45 centimeters, maybe it's just 30 centimeters. Something like that. And when I put on all these 3 put together, I may talk about maybe half a centimeter, maybe even some millimeters of the closest distance it needs to focus. Of course, that requires a very steady hand, a very, very fast shutter speed if you're going to do it handheld. If you have a tripod and you want to do some remarkable close-up work, like for instance of an eye of an insect or of some cellular structure, this is how you do it. I actually took one shot yesterday of some coffee grains. I was in a hotel in Oslo and I was a little bit bored, so I found a pack of a bag of coffee, and I actually took on all my extension tubes, and actually I got a picture, and 3 grains of coffee was enough to fill the sensor, just to give you an idea of how much bigger you can actually enlarge very, very small objects, making them a true macro. Another little advice I would recommend, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the world of macro, which is kind of fascinating because you can find amazing things to photograph just outside your door, is these little white things. This is a diffuser. A diffuser is just it's just a little piece of plastic, to be quite honest, who softens up the light from the flash. If you're using, you can say, ordinary. If you're using an ordinary flash without the diffuser, you will get a very much more yellow or much brighter kind of light. And it's much more harsh because it will go straight on. What the diffuser does is that it spreads the light a little bit more. So what I primarily do when I try to shoot like insects and so on is to have one of my flashes from the one side down, and the other flash from the other side up, so that the subject is around in this area here. So that is my kind of tricks for macro photography. It's just to go out there, just try and have fun. It's an amazing world, and it's just brilliant to see what actually can be, what you actually can see when you get really, really close. And to end with the world's maybe most famous photography quote of all time, Robert Capa, the war photographer, he said that if your picture aren't good enough, you aren't close enough. And on that note, if you like what I do, please subscribe to my blog exploreray.com or to my YouTube channel. Take care and have an excellent weekend. Goodbye.